Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Warcraft. Gone is the day of really shitty video game adaptations that have no involvement from the developers and are made by bad filmmakers. But then you enter the Warcraft movie, which has the publisher, the developer involved, and is directed by a good filmmaker like Duncan Jones, but is too precious with the material and isn't very fun or good at all, and now we've suddenly entered into a new age of bad video game movies, but in a different degree of not so great. It's kind of like we're slowly evolving, but we haven't gotten to the place where we can say, hey, video game movies are good now. It's a genre that really hasn't blossomed yet, and Warcraft shows it's probably not as close to blossoming as we thought it maybe could be. And that's really disappointing, because as you're watching Warcraft, you think some of these ideas could work, some of the ways they're doing certain things, how each side isn't portrayed necessarily as the villain. There's villains on either side, just like in the video game. You get to see both the humans and the orcs. Neither side is portrayed as the villain. There's interesting fantasy ideas. You don't really get to see many big budget fantasy films that aren't like a Lord of the Rings or a Hobbit type of thing. And in a way, this film's kind of unique, particularly in how cartoony and frankly how fucking dorky this shit is. I mean, this is like one of the dorkiest fantasy films I've seen in a long time, and it just revels in it, and that's kind of awesome. You don't really get to see one that just doesn't seem to care if the public likes its designs or not, but that's kind of the whole thing that goes throughout Warcraft. It doesn't really care if the public gets into it. It has a huge, massive following, and they just expect you to just take the deep dive that everyone else has, but it never really brings you in, and it also doesn't really care about connecting you to any characters, and with direction during the battle sequences that isn't really that unique or special, especially when we're in the middle of the summer movie season. This movie feels particularly ununique, and I just kind of sat there thinking like, so I guess it's gonna be a while for video game movies if this is how it goes so far. The orc horde, who have used up the planet or dimension or wherever they live, I'm not really sure, and decide to make a portal and go to the human world, which I guess isn't Earth or something, and they go through with this evil wizard orc guy to set up a new land and settle there and start attacking humans and destroying villages and sucking humans' essence out and things like that. And then the humans have to fight back and get their magic guy involved and try to fight the orcs while also trying to figure out a way for them to hopefully coexist, but of course failing, getting into many skirmishes and arguments as the humans try to figure out a way to save their existing kingdom and the orcs try to figure out a way to settle in a new world to hopefully save their race. The interesting thing, and what seems to be the problem with, I've seen 3 video game movies this year, Ratchet and Clank, Angry Birds, and now Warcraft, and Warcraft is, as of right now, the only live action one I've seen this year, right? I think. And I think the problem is that all these developers want to be Marvel. They want to be Marvel Studios. They want to be able to control these movies, just like how Marvel does. You know, Marvel is a comic book company. They made movies. And in a success idea, that makes a lot of sense. Marvel makes a lot of money. I completely understand. But the thing that they completely forget is that Marvel's run by Kevin Feige, and he's really good at making movies. He's a great producer. They don't really have a great producer. They have Thomas Tull, who runs Legendary, and I guess he could be, possibly, but not in this movie. Warcraft is too precious with its material, and that seems to be the thing with these developer-run movies, is they're selling them towards these massive audiences, and they're putting so much into it, and you can tell they really care about it, but they're not great movies. They're not the kind of movies that someone who wasn't into Warcraft, you wouldn't really fall in love with it. And the interesting thing is that Marvel started with Iron Man, who I didn't even really care about as a character before I saw that movie, and suddenly everybody loved Iron Man, and Robert Downey Jr. becomes a major star. Warcraft has like zero personality to it and zero fun, and isn't even really concerned with getting people into it. They didn't make this movie to make a movie that you would fall in love with and try to win you over and get you to see more Warcraft movies because you have been won over so much the way Marvel does so excellently. Warcraft is just about setting up that franchise. The whole idea of this movie is kind of a prequel to all of the games that frankly just happened in a previous precursor thing to like the first game or something. It's not even one of the games. It's setting up all of that. It's kind of like someone who is really into Warcraft sat down and plotted out a franchise but didn't figure out a way to make a movie that people would love Warcraft. When I found out this isn't even really a game, it's like the precursor prequel to a franchise idea. It's like, why are you being so presumptive that this is going to work out for you? It almost felt like I was watching a prequel to a movie I liked that was being screwed up very terribly. It felt like I was watching like the Star Wars prequels or the Hobbit movies, but there was no Lord of the Rings or original Star Wars trilogy. I'm just watching this. And it has all these boring political ideas just like the prequels. It has all this excessive stuff where none of the stakes fucking matter because I do not care about any of these people because they are terrible characters, except for like the lead kind of orc guy who is played by Toby Kebbell, and I kind of like him, but only really at the beginning because he is the only real scene that looks like any sort of like character development where I really care. The lead human like has his son killed, and it's like every time I'm like, oh right, he had a son. Okay, alright, forgot. And then sometimes after his son dies, spoilers I guess, I would just be like, oh right, his son, that happened. I'd have to remind myself because I had like zero connection. The guy who's the lead apparently is on that show Vikings, but he looks like Alexander Skarsgård. I really thought Alexander Skarsgård was in this movie till like I looked it up and I went on IMDb and I saw it in the movie. I'm still kind of not sure he's not Alexander Skarsgård because he looks like just like him. I'm assuming he would have kind of more fun with this role or like give a more captivating performance or something along those lines. He didn't though. None of the humans are interesting at all to watch. That whole side is wasted. It reminds me of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, but like crappier, where the apes were far more interesting than the humans. In this, the orcs are a little more interesting than the humans, but like not as much as Dawn of the Planet of the Apes because this movie's not really nearly as good, although Toby Kebbell is in both. But the orc side is a little more fascinating. They're so involved in the politics of it and setting up all these things and having exposition that they never really thought about making an interesting movie. As much as this borrows from things like Lord of the Rings and is obviously very influenced by Tolkien, the thing that Peter Jackson did when he made the Lord of the Rings movies is he said very publicly, I'm making a Lord of the Rings movie so people can get into Lord of the Rings, an accessible Lord of the Rings film. And Warcraft just frankly forgot all about this. Duncan Jones, this is probably definitely his worst movie, and it shows none of his personality we saw in Moon and Source Code. And as cool as it is to have the Goblin King's son direct a fantasy film, it just feels like a big corporate fantasy movie. And although you have Universal and Legendary and Blizzard all involved in this, and it's like a miracle he can even have the opening scene with the orc and his wife in it, that's actually pretty good. It's the only scene in this movie that is actually really good. So if you want to see anything, just see that scene and just walk out because it's just like not getting any better from there. Like Colin Trevorrow or whatever got more of his personality in Jurassic World, and none of us really like him. This just doesn't really show Duncan Jones is ready to really be a blockbuster filmmaker. He's ready to be that kind of typical blockbuster filmmaker that you expect from an indie director, to have no personality and just to kind of be a yes man. I mean, this is like a real step down for Duncan Jones. When video game movies are able to understand what to do with film directors, with their properties, and how they could like really adapt something and really make a movie out of one of these games, then that's the day you'll get a great video game movie. Because that's something Marvel understood. I know people act like there's no auteurism in Marvel movies. If you notice how different each of them are, and like they really use those directors' talents to help with the movie. And I don't think Warcraft did that whatsoever. And I think that's the problem with all these video game movies, is like they're just kind of made for the fans, but like that's not how you really make a great movie, just for the fans. It just doesn't really work. And there were people in the theater who were like super into it, but I just really wasn't. There were no jokes at all. There was no levity whatsoever. Honestly, I wish someone had run through the theater and yelled Leroy Jenkins, because it would have been at least a little exciting. I would have probably really liked that. I'm sure someone in some theater is screaming that right now, and not necessarily in Warcraft. I'm sure Me Without You is probably happening in there too. This is very disappointing, and I don't think Warcraft, same with Angry Birds or Ratchet and Clank, I don't think it's because it's a video game. These aren't good movies. I think it's just the way they're coming about these video game movies is completely wrong. I understand you're coming from the video game area and they're all very successful and they have all this power, but they really need to find someone who understands how to bridge that and make it into a movie. And if you want to be like Marvel, understand how Marvel did that. Maybe they need an actual Kevin Feige who understands that, or maybe get directors who can really do it. But like Duncan Jones, it's an interesting idea to to have him do a bigger movie. But like when you think of Source Code and Moon and then you go and then Warcraft, you're like, wait, what? That just like doesn't fit at all, does it? Of course this wasn't gonna work. If you just like think about it, it's like none of those pieces seem like they would go together, and sometimes happy accidents can happen, but this is just an accident. It also isn't like a fun disaster either. It's like I would much rather watch Gods of Egypt, frankly. It's like the theory Nolan says on Pizza Party all the time. It's like if you're gonna be the worst, then you should really be the fucking worst. And this is like not even good at being Battlefield Earth. It's just kind of bland and corporate and just like a normal kind of fantasy thing. Like none of the action sequences are particularly well shot. There's no battle scene that I'm like, oh my god, but that one scene, like none of it was really done very well. Just very much like any other big blockbuster fantasy type film, and it just kind of blends in with all of them, and it kind of just becomes this house paint kind of a fantasy film. I like seeing fantasy films. I actually like the cartoon elements of it, but the way it's shot is just so fucking boring. It's definitely one of the least interestingly made big blockbuster films I've seen in a while, but I do like how like it just really went for being a Warcraft film. It really just went right into it and hoped you could keep up. You didn't at all, but it hoped, and I like that the orcs were cartoony and it really went for that Warcraft style. I think those are really great things that Blizzard really went for it, and they really wanted to make very much a Warcraft film, and you can't deny that about this movie, but this is not a good Warcraft movie. If you're into Warcraft, I'm sure you'll like it, and I'm sure there's enough people out there that this movie will do fine maybe. Was a boring big budget movie with orcs fighting humans. That should be awesome. I should be like, holy shit, I love this Warcraft movie. I never thought I'd like a Warcraft movie. I didn't want to be part of the backlash, but frankly, I just don't like this movie. I'm for anything being a movie and being a good movie, but I just don't think video game movies this summer have shown that they are really going to be the great video game movie yet. It's interesting, both this and Angry Birds are very much about immigrants and refugees, and this takes a much more nuanced slant to it than Angry Birds does, since it's giving both sides equal treatment, which I actually quite liked. You know, it's sad that this is boring and kind of such a disaster, because it does kind of actually does have some interesting ideas towards it, but it just really isn't very good. Yeah, it does that, but wouldn't you much rather watch Dawn of the Planet of the Apes? Wouldn't I much rather watch Lord of the Rings? Wouldn't I much rather be doing something other than watching this movie? It's not a disaster where I can go, oh, it was so funny. It's not like Gods of Egypt is a disaster I want to talk about. Warcraft is a disaster I don't want to talk about because I'm fucking bored. Like, it just isn't interesting. The Paula Patton thing was weird. Like, why does she look like she's cosplaying? And is she half human? Like, that I never understood. This is like a disaster in the way it's so bland and uninteresting. It's just like not worth even going into how uninteresting of a disaster it is. And it's really the kind of movie that's better for making reviews on YouTube than actually sitting there and watching. So I hope you have fun with all these reviews, but there's really no reason to go to the theater unless you're a big Warcraft fan, and I'm sure you'll have fun, because that seems to be the only thing that these video game movies are made for. And until they're made into actual movies to get other people into them for real love of the property, I guess we're just going to have to settle for this, and settling for this is really fucking disappointing at this point. So if you have seen Warcraft and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.